Good morning and welcome, Borodar and Croeso, to this panel session as part of the Beyond Conference 2020. Thank you for the introduction. My name is Sarah Pepper. I'm Director of Creative Economy at Cardiff University, and I've been given the great pleasure to chair this panel session for the conference this morning. But looking back, it was a year ago that we were last gathered together, many of us in Edinburgh, and so much change has taken place in that time. It's almost hard to believe, right across the world. And it's affected all of us and the cultural, social and economic fabric of our environments so greatly. But how has this affected and impacted the creative industries landscape? Along with the tourism sector, culture and creative sectors have been reported to be among the most affected by the COVID crisis. With some part of the sector, a significant number of jobs at risk and venue-based sectors closed for the foreseeable future. As such, the crisis has sharply exposed the structural fragility of producers and makers and the inadequacy of public support schemes ill adapted to the sector business models and forms of employment. But parts of the sector have innovated rapidly, notably with accelerated digitalization, and some subsectors, like for example, gaming and content production, seeing significant increase in demand and opportunity. The pivot has become a well-known maneuver, and resilience and survivability a necessary discussion at every twist and turn. And what of the virtual production landscape within the creative sector, a world that embraces the use and incorporation of visual effects and technology through the production lifecycle, a world that is experiencing growth and global reputation for the UK? Our session this morning will discuss all of these questions, focusing on what virtual production looks like right now in the UK and what it might look like post-COVID, whenever that might be. We'll also be considering the role of partnerships in developing the virtual production space, and in particular, partnerships between academia and industry in terms of building physical infrastructure, skills, and viable businesses across the country to grow the UK's already well-recognised strengths in this field. And I'm really pleased to say that I have three brilliant panelists with me this morning who will share their thoughts and experience and reflect on these questions this morning. And I'd like to introduce them to you now before we get into our discussions. Firstly, I'd like to welcome Theo Jones. Theo is an Academy Award nominated VFX supervisor for Framestore, currently based at their London office. Although I'm sure last time we spoke on video call, he may have been in beautiful Devon. He's worked at Framestore, a company known globally for their visual effects expertise, for 17 years, and has worked in their offices in Canada, the US, and the UK. During his time at Framestore, he has worked across a wealth of titles and jobs spanning film, integrated advertising and immersive divisions, to name a few. A very warm welcome to you, Theo. Our second panel member is Pippa Bostock, and Pippa is Business and Development Manager at the University of Portsmouth. Pippa uses her expertise, knowledge and immense passion for the creative industries to specialise in creative and immersive XR, and is currently, amongst many other projects, working to realise the Centre for Creative and Immersive XR, which is being built in Portsmouth at the moment and due to open, Pippa tells me, in October 2021. Looking forward to hearing more about that. Welcome to Pippa also. And finally, the third member of the panel is Professor Frank Lyons, who is Professor of Music and Associate Dean of Research and Impact in Arts, Humanities and Social Sciences at Ulster University. As well as having an international profile as a composer, Frank also co-led the successful Future Screens NI bid to the AHRC Creative Industries Cluster Programme to support the development of creative industries in Northern Ireland. Frank is currently working on a significant scale project with partners to realise the visionary Screen Media Innovation Lab in Belfast, which again, I'm hoping he'll tell us more about during the discussion. So a very warm welcome to you also, Frank. So thanks to that brilliant panel. There's a wealth of knowledge there, and I'm just going to dive straight into the questions so we can start hearing from them. Theo, if you don't mind, I'd like to ask you an opening question to put this session into context from an industry perspective. In your opinion, Theo, what does the UK virtual production landscape look like right now? What's been happening over the last decade in this space, and where are we right now at this particular moment?
Well, actually, I think it's quite an exciting time for the virtual production landscape in the UK. I think we're seeing a huge growth in that area. If you kind of wind back 10 years to when we at Framestore really kind of started working with this technology, which was back in 2011-12 on the production of Gravity, it felt like at that time it was quite a niche set of tools and workflows. It felt like everything had to be kind of done bespoke per production. And it really felt like it was the remit of a handful of kind of high-end, high-budget kind of Hollywood productions. And over the intervening years, we've kind of seen a gradual increase in uptake. But really, up until the last few years, it was still felt like it was the remit of a handful of pioneering directors who were kind of into the technology and into the workflows, and the majority of filmmakers were still kind of making films in the traditional way. But actually, over the last few years, we've really seen a major shift with productions such as Jungle Book and Lion King going through the UK, and then obviously things like The Mandalorian getting big headlines for their innovative use of LED screens. And then obviously the pandemic itself has been a huge catalyst. I think we've seen, as I say, we're seeing a kind of linear increase in interest and uptake, and then the pandemic hit and the restrictions came into place. And suddenly I think there's been a huge increase in interest in these tools because it does lend itself, this workflow, to the kind of challenges that we're facing during these restrictions. It's a great, the virtual productions, real-time collaboration in the virtual space is really made for allowing creatives to collaborate when they geographically can't be in the same locations at the same time. You can collaborate in a virtual space. And so really actually the interest in these tools, it felt like just before the pandemic and in the few years before, there was still an element of us having to slightly sell the idea of using these technologies to some filmmakers and kind of show them the benefits. And there was a kind of barrier to entry. People were used to making films in a certain way and they liked making them that way, and they tended to gravitate back to the way they'd always made them unless there was a very good reason not to. And now with the pandemic, there is a very good reason not to. They can't make films in the traditional way, and there's a lot of meticulous planning that needs to be done, and there's a lot of reasons why they can't go to the locations they would have gone to otherwise. So I think the real-time technology that's available to us through the virtual production techniques and workflows and tools allows them to continue that creative process, continue filmmaking, through this, through the virtual scouting of remote locations, through the remote collaboration in virtual sessions. And that has also coincided with a maturation of the off-the-shelf solutions. Companies like Epic Games have been putting a lot of effort into off-the-shelf solutions to some of the virtual production challenges. So the barrier to entry has come down, and I think all of these kind of factors have coalesced, and now we're seeing a huge increase in interest and a huge increase in possibilities in what this kind of workflow is capable of.
How have you seen the market for visual production change for a well-established company like Framestore, for example, over the period you've worked for them? So that's, we said about 17 years. If you're looking back over that period, what kind of global opportunities are there now that perhaps weren't there 17 years ago, for example?
Well, I think it's, in terms of the virtual production, it's kind of gone through a democratization of these techniques, and now we're able to, looking back, as I say, kind of 10 years, there was a big barrier to entry. It felt like everything had to be done bespoke. You were kind of solving problems anew on each production. The technology itself wasn't at the kind of maturity level that it is now. And so you kind of, you had to weigh up which productions these type of techniques were suitable for. Now it feels like there's almost no production that couldn't benefit to some degree from these approaches, from these techniques. And so we're now seeing it used as an internal tool within Framestore, but in client-facing pre-production stages, in the pre-visualization, and then on into the shoot and on into post-production. And we're kind of using these tools and these workflows at every stage of production, on productions of almost every scale. So I think the opportunities have increased exponentially over the last few years, and we've really reached a kind of tipping point with this technology where it's getting the kind of wide acceptance. And I think the pandemic has been a catalyst for that, but I don't see it changing once the pandemic is hopefully well behind us. I think people have now seen the benefits of these approaches and these technologies, and I think this will be a tipping point, but the adoption of these techniques will only increase into the future.
Thanks, Theo. That's interesting. Yes, definitely here to stay from the sounds of it, and become more embedded in every part of the production process. What would a business like yours, like Framestore, or in your opinion, what do the wider creative sector need right now that perhaps universities, because this session is very much focusing on that relationship between industry and academia. What would you need from universities? What could partnerships with universities offer, particularly with the lens of thinking about what you've just described, virtual production, here to stay, growing? What would an organisation like yours need from those kind of relationships and partnerships?
Well, I think there's two kind of critical areas that I think collaboration between industry and academia can really be a benefit in both directions. For us, I think it's talent. Obviously, we need good people, and particularly in the realms of virtual production and real-time technology, that's a very competitive realm at the moment. So there is a shortage of really good talent in that area in terms of meeting the demand that's we're seeing increase at a very rapid rate. So that's obviously the kind of most obvious area. But I think also research as well. We see a lot of opportunities for research that we are not able to pursue because we only have a certain amount of R&D capacity, and our R&D capacity tends to be not always, but it tends to be quite project focused and quite project driven. So the kind of more speculative, more blue sky kind of long-term R&D, we get to do some of it, but we see a lot more opportunities for that than we get to explore. And I think that's where partnerships with academia could be really beneficial for us because they have the opportunity for that kind of longer term research, and equally hopefully we can supply some information to them around what are the challenges that we're facing, what are the challenges we see coming up for the industry over the next 5-10 years, to make sure that the research that's being done has got that industry perspective.
So lots of opportunities there. I think synergies, very clear call there around specific areas to partner in for opportunities. Are there any challenges, in your opinion, Theo, working with universities, with industry and academia, collaborating? They're different kind of organizations, different kind of animals. Do you see any challenges there, or have you experienced any challenges?
Yeah, we've got a few research projects that we're collaborating with educational institutions at the moment. I think one of the challenges is obviously a different cadence. We tend to be very kind of immediate in the projects that we're facing and the challenges that we're facing. We need solutions immediately. The cadence of academia tends to be more longer term. The pace, but that is a challenge, I think. But it's also, as I say, an opportunity because research. Academic institutions do get the opportunity for that longer term planning and that longer term thinking, which we get to do to a point, but we also have very much the day-to-day challenges and the day-to-day projects that we need, needs that we have to meet as well. Okay, so I think, really important, I guess, for those of us working in universities to ensure we look for where that complementarity exists, but also understand the differences so that we can make sure that the opportunities present maximum benefit, I guess, to all parties. Pippa, I'd like to come to you now, if I may. You've worked at Portsmouth University for some years, so you know the higher education, the academic environment well, but you've also done a huge amount of work with industry. So I think you've got such a lot of experience to bring here. What do you see universities or education environments offering to industry, specifically in relation to the creative industries and virtual production space? What opportunities do you see, in your opinion?
Thanks, Sarah. I think for us, there are so many different ways in which we can help industry and work together. As Theo's already said, it's very much all about the collaboration, and it's finding the right type of collaboration for the right project and understanding what's driving each other and getting to the heart of that challenge. So as Theo said, sometimes things need a very quick, rapid turnaround. That's not the right thing to put a student project on, for example, that may be looking at a 6 to 12 months, or the right thing to go and apply for a project that could take 6 months to win that funding. So it's recognizing when you need to do shorter, quick collaborations and when there's a longer term project that's the most suitable. At the moment at Portsmouth, we're in the middle of building a £5.2 million centre of creative and immersive XR. So for us, we are very excited about the opportunities that those facilities will bring. Most of that money is going directly into the kit, We're very lucky to be supported by Silent Lab to make that possible. Now, for us, that gives us the ability to lower that barrier to entry that Theo also mentioned down even further, because we recognise that it's so hard for businesses and for individuals to understand that transformative power of immersive XR until you've experienced it. You have to have that time to play, that time to come and understand the technology and to understand what it can do for you. So that's very much what we've set out for our centre to be. Very much, we're a demonstrator, effectively. We want to get companies in, get them using the technology, and get them to understand how it can help them and how we can work with them in different ways. So that access to facilities has been crucial, but also going back to the skills. Our graduates are in such high demand; they fly out the door. Normally in April, I'm trying to get them to work on projects, and they've all been stolen by the companies we're working with, which is wonderful. That's what we want. But also it just shows how high that demand is. I think it was Story Futures Academy's recent report called these graduates with these real-time engine skills unicorns, because they're so rare and mythical. So very much what we're trying to do is build a unicorn farm. So we've got all these graduates with all the skills that are needed to go out into industry and to help to drive this work forward. I mean, we're very lucky on the virtual production side. We're bringing into the centre, in partnership with White Light, we're bringing in a smart stage facility with an additional video virtual production wall. So we'll have a lot of facilities within the centres for people to come and understand how that can work, and to begin to understand and bring that into the workflow, so the students are working on these real industry challenges. We love challenges of all shapes and sizes, and I think it's when we address those challenges that we're most powerful and most able to help industry.
Thanks, Pippa. I love the idea of a unicorn farm in Portsmouth. I can't wait to come visit as soon as the pandemic is over and we're allowed to travel again. I will be straight down. Can you give an example, Pippa? I particularly enjoyed when we were chatting a couple of weeks ago, hearing about some of the industry partnerships that you've broken. I want to talk a little bit in a minute about cross-sector partnerships. But for this question, if you could just give us some examples of the kind of partnerships that you've formed. I know when you're developing the centre, there's a lot of different strategic partnerships there. Can you talk to us a little bit about those, explaining, partnerships with big and small companies, and what you do to ensure that those work well? Because partnership working is, an art, not a science, in my opinion. How do you go about that?
I totally agree with you. It really is. It comes from really good communication and really understanding what each partner expects and wants to get out of the collaboration, and being really honest and open about that. So a number of the strategic partnerships we have for the centre, some of which are with Vicon, for example, on the motion capture side. We also have Digital Garage, who are supplying on all the volumetric side into the centre. It's about understanding what works for them, what they need to get out of the partnership, and having that mutual respect and trust that builds over time. To be honest, it's not something you can always do at high speed, but it's about understanding all those different challenges. So for example, Worthing Museum, who are a local regional museum to us on the South Coast, they came to us and they didn't know what to do with a number of artifacts that were extremely disgusting. And they were like, we don't know what to do with these, we can't display them, we get complaints. And they were things like rings made out of tarantulas and monkey skin capes. And they kind of put them in their storeroom because they had to preserve them, but it was, what do they do with them? We actually worked with them to get some Innovate UK funding and to create a whole exhibition, which was called Designing Disgust, Why Do We Feel the Need to Judge?, which challenged preconceptions of disgust by starting by a spotlit silk dress that the silkworms wiggled out of in light projection, and the whole dress filled up, and said, now how do you feel about your beautiful dress? 13,000 silkworms were boiled alive to make this dress. So it's all about taking the challenge they had and reframing it in a different way in order to that exhibition we're still planning for to come live hopefully next year if the pandemic allows. But it's understanding that. I mean, we are effectively going to be a demonstrator. That's a large part of what we already do. We're lucky enough to be part of the Royal Shakespeare Company Audiences of the Future project, so we've got a very busy year next year. I think someone's mentioned the word pivot already. We've already become very familiar with that. We've had to pivot on that project, and we're really excited about what we'll be able to do as a project in 21. But that's all about teamwork, that's all about communication, and making sure that everyone's respectful and works together, really.
Pippa, we just slightly lost your mic at the end. I don't know, we can hear you, but it was a little bit quiet. So I'll just give you heads up on that. And a final question, if I may. What we've seen in Cardiff, in the creative cluster here, quite a lot in the last year, 18 months, is this crossover, this cross-sector collaboration between the creative industries and all sorts of other sectors working in the region here. To produce some really interesting projects that have outputs for audiences in perhaps different ways that other creative sector projects might. I know you gave me one brilliant example when we were chatting recently. Could you tell us a bit about that project with Novatech, or any of your experiences of doing the kind of work we're talking about, but with not creative sector partners, if you like?
We had a project with the Royal Navy. So the first Sea Lord came into a lot of collaborations with the Royal Navy. First Sea Lord had a new type of boat, the PAC 24 rig boat, which they basically wanted to teach people how to park it safely and to drive this particular type of boat. So we created as a student project over the course of a year with a company called Novatech. Sorry, I'm just going to try putting these back in, see if the sound improves for you. Apologies on that. Okay, so hopefully that's a bit better for you. So
thanks, Pippa.
Then the first Sea Lord. So we then basically created a PAC 24 simulator using a 4-dock platform in partnership with Novatech. So over the course of the year, the students created the VR simulator for that type of boat. It was supposed to be a successful proof of concept. That was the aim, really, that it would give the Navy something to take on and develop in the future. The student project was so successful that the Navy actually took it to DSET, which is a Defence UK conference, to demonstrate it. It was so successful there, it then went on to Europe to be demonstrated at another level. Then the Navy actually gave Novatech a contract for £500,000 to actually create 15 of these simulators that have now been rolled out across the UK. That's one of the ones we can talk about because Novatech themselves have written it up as a case study with the Royal Navy, but there's lots of others across the defence sector and many others. So cross-sectoral working is something that's really at the heart of what we do.
Fantastic. Thanks, Pippa. Appreciate that. And I'd like to come now to Frank, our third panel member. And Frank, the question for you, there's been significant developments in the screen sectors in Belfast and the city region over the past decade, maybe 20 years. I had the great fortune, when we talked, I mentioned my recent visit to Belfast pre-COVID, and I was just blown away by the collection of things that were happening, the different organizations that were coming together to draw attention to that and to think about that in the future. Can you tell us a bit more about those in particular, and sort of focusing on the virtual production environment, but tell us a bit about how that's all come about, how that's manifested, how the partners have come together to focus on the creative sector, so specifically in the city region.
Thanks, Sarah. As you mentioned, Belfast itself, there's a real kind of excitement and vibe about the growth around Belfast. And a lot of that's actually been driven by the success of the screen sector and its knock-on effects into tourism and so on. And there are a number of particularly important organisations who've driven that. And I think most people will be aware of Northern Ireland Screen and the success that they really brought around Game of Thrones. And, if we're going to be talking about virtual production, really pushing the envelope initially in Game of Thrones around virtual production techniques. But you've also got successes like The Fall, Line of Duty, Derry Girls, which are all shot, for significant parts in Belfast and the wider region. So NI Screen are an absolutely key developmental body across the piece, from large-scale film production through high-end TV. And as I'll mention, the importance in terms of partnerships with universities and so on. BBC Northern Ireland as well, key partnership with Northern Ireland Screen in terms of their commissioning of local productions. So again, and BBC and I have also driven a lot of the R&D projects that we'll talk about. Belfast Harbour, hugely significant in terms of its investment over the years in studio facilities, large scale sound stages in the Titanic studios. Most recently, the development of the studios at North Foreshore, where we've got Krypton in the Northman shooting as we speak. And as I'll talk about the Screen Media Innovation Lab, that's key in terms of the location for SMIL. Most significantly in recent years has been the development of the Future Screens NI program, which is an HRC creative cluster program, and that has really driven the connections between those industry players I've just mentioned, large scale, the universities, and also the absolute huge number of smaller companies in games, animation, immersive tech that are around the Belfast region and more widely in Northern Ireland. And so that whole piece around, in terms of how virtual production is developing coming out of that, a lot of the developments there are driven by Future Screens. And we've engaged literally over 100 companies from, single person startups through medium-sized companies, SMEs, and a lot of the R&D projects, upwards of 100 R&D projects in the last 2.5 years. A lot of those focus on working with companies to develop game engine technologies, looking at 3D scanning technologies, looking at immersive, and Theo mentioned some of the potential of virtual production to enable us to work remotely and stuff. So a lot of that's being driven in the R&D projects that Future Screens NI are involved in at the minute. And in terms of Future Screens was hugely significant because led by Ulster University, it partners with Queen's University Belfast in terms of the complementary expertise that they bring to the table. But again, significantly, really key partnerships with Northern Ireland Screen, BBC, Belfast Harbour, and the way that the academic side of the house and the industry side of the house have collaborated over those years, as I say, been really significant, driving the growth in the sector.
What part in particular do you see your university and other university partners you just mentioned, what part did they play in all of this? And why do you think that it's important and valuable for higher education to be engaging with industry? It's a two-way street, isn't it? But what role do you think that your university and other universities have played in that exciting set of developments that you've just described?
Well, for me, Ulster University, we've got the good fortune to have 4 campuses in Northern Ireland, and it really gives us coverage right across the whole region. So I suppose, we've obviously got creative strengths right across the region. The core focus is in Belfast, of course, but, when you're looking at in Derry, Ulster, have devised and developed new course provision in cinematic arts up there. So I think that spread across the region that Ulster have is really, really important. We've always been conscious, and we've worked very collaboratively with Queen's University. There are two universities in Northern Ireland. And, we've always made sure that we work on our complementary strengths. And I suppose Ulster has developed that reputation over a long number of years. I mean, the Belfast School of Design was founded in 1849, and we're building our sort of £500 million new university campus, in that same location. But we, in recent years, Professor Greg Maguire has been really significant in driving a new animation course going back to maybe 12, 13 years, which has been hugely successful and has driven the development of screen production, games design, and cinematic arts courses that I've just mentioned. And I think what we've always worked really hard at is this idea of we've got so much to learn from industry. We've got to break down this perception of a university as being an ivory tower. And as you and I have discussed, it takes a huge amount of time and effort and energy to make sure that those partnerships between academics and industry are working at the right level. And of course, as Theo already alluded to, universities, have that capacity for organized, structured R&D programs and the ability to disseminate the findings that come out of those R&D programs. And critically, it's all about development of the talent pipeline. We've got to make sure that we're working with industry to make sure they're informing course development, so that our graduates, the new talent pipeline is suitably equipped to work in the sectors of the industry that we're really focusing on the day, which are incredibly, tech focused, but still have those traditional elements that the creatives, can bring to the table. And I think at Ulster, we do pride ourselves on the fact that we've developed this agility and flexibility to respond at the pace that Theo, for instance, has pointed out is absolutely critical to work on the project basis with industry.
Yes, I couldn't agree with you more. I think Theo described it as different cadences, and I think that's, it's important to understand, how the landscape, the environment of those different organisations. But it's also important to find a flow through, a way that means that we can all work together to suit everybody's needs, because everybody will have different needs. Talking about different needs, Frank, I'd like to ask you a question about then working with different partners. It doesn't have to be industry, it can be different academic partners, although universities are usually large organizations. But I would like to focus on working with different size of organizations, because actually that does have quite a big impact on resources and time and capability. I mean, I know that you've got a huge amount of experiences of partnering with many, many different kinds of organizations. Do you have any pearls of wisdom about how you manage that to ensure that everybody realizes what it is that they need to, or that everybody feels welcome, and that everybody has a real contribution and input to the bigger picture aim?
Yeah, well, it's acknowledging that everyone, whether large or small, academic or industry, have something to offer. And I think that's absolutely key, and being genuinely open to collaboration. And I think, as I've mentioned before, I mean, we've been fortunate at Ulster. I've worked with the director of Future Screens NI, Professor Paul Moore, for many, many years. And, the team that we have from Ulster who are involved in Future Screens NI, for instance, it's Paul and Nuala Tolman and people like that, we've been working with for, many, many, many years. We've developed really close relationships with industry. One thing, going back a number of years, that I heard as a criticism from industry was that they didn't know who to approach in the university. There were so many different points of contact, and lots of the messages and lots of the requests from industry were just being lost. So what we decided to do was pull together this easily identifiable core team, all of whom have actually had experience in industry as well. So they got the messages. And so what we then were able to do was filter all of the industry communication through one channel, essentially. So we were picking everything up. We were able to feed back to industry through exactly those same channels. And actually that works. That general approach works, whether it's a huge multinational industrial player you're talking to, or a single person startup. It's about having that sympathetic, responsive point of contact, and then building the flexibility in to respond in your university processes. And I suppose, as I'll chat about shortly, with the Screen Media Innovation Lab project, we're working, across the globe with huge global players, but we're also making sure that actually, the regional players, the single person startups that we've worked with for a number of years, cheek by jowl, they're equally as important. They've got as much to say, they've got as much potential for growth, they've got as much innovation in the kind of R&D and the creative work they're doing. So it's making sure that we gather it all together.
Thanks, Frank. And I'd like to jump on that opportunity and ask you to talk a bit more about the Screen Media Innovation Lab. It's a hugely ambitious project. Can you tell us a bit more about what it will be, what it will do for the virtual production environment and for the cluster in your region, what the timelines are? We know that the facility in Portsmouth is opening next year. I mean, this is so exciting for the UK to hear about these two phenomenal new buildings, this infrastructure, where we can hear about, industry and academia and everybody pulling together, from the port authorities that you've described and so on. Just give us a flavour, because it's such an ambitious project, Frank.
Yeah, it is hugely ambitious, and it's on a huge scale. I mean, we just so it's part of the Belfast region city deals stable of innovation projects. You've got 5 projects. We be familiar with city deals in terms of, it's central government injection of cash to try and drive exponential growth in local economies. So that's essentially what we've got here, the Belfast Region City Deal. So the Screen Media Innovation Lab, or SMIL, is one of 5. It's the only creative project in that particular stable. So we're looking at something on the scale of something between 60 and 65 million pounds of investment, coming hopefully from UK Treasury, but also significant investment from some of the private sector companies that we've mentioned, like Belfast Harbour, like BBC, and so on. It's a huge facility. I mean, it's something between 6,000 and 7,000 square meters. A 13,000 square foot virtual production stage, a 9,000 square foot motion capture stage, and so on and so on. And something of that scale absolutely needs the big players to buy in. So we've spent many years, we're probably into our 4th year working on this project now. We just submitted our outline business case yesterday morning, which was, a hugely significant step for us. And so it's in terms of the virtual production piece, the engagement with industry has been so intense and so detailed going back a number of years. And it was really, probably 2.5 years ago, during conversations with Greg McGuire in particular, that we settled on the focus on virtual production, because we could see then the potential that it was going to explode, not in the way that it has in the last year or something, but we could actually see that potential. So we decided on, okay, let's see what would be required. Let's see what kind of provision there is. And of course, we found out that the demand for virtual production facilities is huge. It massively outstrips supply and availability of virtual production facilities. So we knew we were onto something there. So really, if you can imagine the idea that, again, building on those relationships that I've mentioned with the organisations, building on the massive explosion in R&D activity with local companies, because city deals, as I say, are all about indigenous growth, new jobs, new GVA. So we've got to factor all that in. But the scale of what we're talking about absolutely demands that it will be located in somewhere like the new Belfast Harbour Studios in North Foreshore. They have plan or permission, and hopefully we're going to work with them in terms of making this significant virtual production facility the absolute heart of a huge complex of sound stages. And as I say, you've got globally relevant players already using those types of facility in Belfast Harbour. So the conversations, the partnerships, as I mentioned, but we're looking at your partnerships with Epic and Unreal Engine, companies in the West Coast that are at the cutting edge of virtual production, like Ben Grossman and Magnopus, the Halons, the Third Floors of the world. We've been in close contact with them as we've developed the design and the equipment lists for these facilities. And of course, then we need big tech players because of the tech focus. So you've got the Dell EMCs and the BTs of the world working very, very closely with us on it. But, ultimately, the university's there as well in terms of the R&D capability, but also we're working really, really closely on how we address the huge demand for new talent, really skilled young people, the unicorns, as Pippa described, because we all know just how much demand there is, and we can't keep the UK at the cutting edge of these screen industries without really driving that development of talent capacity.
Thanks, Frank. It sounds like such an exciting moment in Belfast and the region, and huge congratulations for all that hard work of pulling everyone together. I know how much effort and energy that requires, and it sounds quite extraordinary that vision and ambition. So we just have a few minutes left, so perhaps a minute each is my challenge to the panel. And I'd like to ask the three panel members where you think the virtual production environment will be in your company or in your region, in your area, in 5 years' time, taking into account some of these exciting infrastructure developments, taking into account some of the potential industry developments that Theo mentioned. What's your vision for the next 5 years for the virtual production world? Theo, may I come to you first?
Yeah, of course. I mean, I think it's going to become ubiquitous, really, I think is kind of the way I see it going. There's been a barrier, as I say, to entry. People need to get a comfort level with the tools, with the technology. I think the pandemic has pushed a lot of people past that kind of initial hump, and now people will hopefully just start seeing what the tools can do for them, as opposed to being put off by the technology. And I think as the technology matures, I hope the actual tech side of it will take a back seat to just what it can do for the creative process. And I think that's really where I see it going over the next 5 years, is actually moving past the technology just to the workflows and to the possibilities. And I think it'll start becoming just another tool that's used on almost every production.
Thanks, Theo. Sound advice from industry expert there. Pippa, you have already stated this morning, you are all about making people comfortable with the tools and technology, with the centre that you're developing. Anything to add to that in terms of your environment? What do you see happening in Portsmouth and the region around you in the next 5 years, or globally in the virtual production space?
I think, like Theo has said, it will become very much one of the tools that's used in the digital toolbox, and it will become something that is used across every different sector. So at the moment, I think these virtual productions are primarily being used for entertainment, for film, theatre, etc. But they will become regular part of life within our defence industries, within our medical settings. They will become much more across all the sectors. And I think that barrier to entry is just going to keep coming down as people get more comfortable, and they will start being able to concentrate on other things and in making them truly immersive in different ways. What's exciting us is that experimentation. It's the fact that we're looking at what happens if you bring in volumetrically captured data onto a smart stage technology. What happens to that data? It's bringing motion capture into those environments. It's looking at location-based experiences, bringing in some of these other elements. So for us, it's the magic that happens when you bring all these different technologies together. That's why we've built the whole immersive pipeline at Portsmouth, so we can do those experimentations across different parts of the chain. So we're very excited. I think the next 5 years are going to be a very exciting time. It's just the beginning, but where it goes to from here is going to be quite wonderful.
Thanks, Pippa. It's inspiring words there, and making magic happen, innovation, doing it with other people and crossing into other sectors. Lots of learning and thoughts to take away there. And Frank, final word over to you, please. I mean, you've already described, this hugely ambitious infrastructure that you're describing, but what do you see for the whole region? Because it is about building an infrastructure, but it is about partnerships and many other things too.
It is, and our vision, as we've discussed today, virtual production is a huge suite of technologies and processes and tools, and it's about making sure that those are accessible, and that such a much larger number of people are familiar and able to use those technologies. What we found in Northern Ireland, in our region, as you might imagine, is we've got a lot of catching up to do with disadvantage and so on, and we found through Future Screens NI work and with mapping that we've done with SMIL that the potential to reach disadvantaged young people, for instance, through this type of approaching the talent capacity and bring that kind of sector into this whole kind of world of virtual production is absolutely huge, and that's something we're working on. That would be a real vision that we'd like to be successful in. And then of course the facility, we're looking at having a 600 seat broadcast studio in the virtual production facility. So it's, as Pippa said, it's hopefully going to track across the large scale film production, the high end TV, the TV and broadcast sector. And again, our vision is to make sure that it works for the global huge companies, as well as providing access and potential for growth for indigenous companies.
Thank you, Frank. I think that was a very important piece of advice to end on there, about the opportunities for greater inclusion around virtual production and some of the technologies and tools that you're talking about. This is an absolutely vital moment to be thinking about inclusion in terms of many of the things we've seen over the last year, and also the opportunities for audiences and workforce in the future. Thank you so much to our brilliant panel. It's been an absolute pleasure to talk to you, Theo, Pippa and Frank. For any audience watching, we are going to be moving into one of the spaces. If you want to come and join us, where we'll be continuing a Q&A, you can put your questions to the panel. We're also going to have 2 2 additional panel members joining us. So we'll look forward to seeing you there in just a few minutes. I think we have a few minutes break first. Thanks ever so much, panel. Thank you, audience, for joining us. Have a good day and hopefully see you soon.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.